Hello and welcome. So, who are the Time Lords from the Chronicles of Dragondom series? The Time Lords in my worlds can be friends, simple observers, or downright antagonistic. You have met those connected with Tobias and his family. Well, some of them at least. So let us set the scene and transport ourselves out into the galaxy to hunt down one or maybe two of the others. Beyond the buildings, the scene was a barren, scarred landscape, devoid of everything. It looked as if the entire planet had been open-cast mined, leaving massive canyons with dust storms raging in the distance. Taking a closer visual, as if homing in on a morsel of food, I could see that not far from the town, the land simply disappeared, and the depth was so great I could not even see the bottom, even with owl's eyes. I pulled back, afraid of getting vertigo. Now I also noticed that there were, in some places, planks or narrow walkways between the roof sections of the buildings, and then, off to one side, I watched a few figures, maybe half a dozen buildings away, running from one to another. It looked as though they were using this zone to move more easily than the crowded streets below. I had better be more careful. I broke off and came fully back into myself. There was nowhere on this roof I could safely hide. But the building behind had a roof access, and next to that there seemed to be a shed and a small garden of sorts. I would try there. I had not picked up any body heat signature, so maybe I could sit it out there and wait until things on the ground level had calmed down a little before going to see if I could listen to any news and maybe find my first local contact. Having witnessed others running across the space up here, I now adopted the same stance as them, running, partly bent over, so as not to be totally visible. I rapidly made my way to my objective and slid behind a stack of empty wooden crates just inside the makeshift wooden shed. I had been right. There was a small food garden, although I didn't recognize the plants, except that there were a large amount of different mushrooms being grown up here. Hood up, I settled down to wait. "Hey, you! That's my place you're sitting in. Who are you?" I started and looked up, but didn't need to look far, as the voice was coming from a child, or what looked like a child of maybe 12 or 13 years old. A boy. But that boy had a knife out and pointing at me. He also looked as if he knew how to use it by the way he was holding it. With little light up here, things were in shadow, but I could see the blade, and I could feel his energy, and he was not afraid. There was a steely surety in his voice. Suddenly he mock-lunged towards me. I parried the knife with my staff. It was an automatic reaction, and the knife flew out of his fingers as the staff cracked loudly just above the wrist. While not with full force, it was enough to momentarily numb his fingers. "Hey, that not fair!" He rubbed the zone I had hit. "You're not from around here, or you wouldn't have dared to hit out at Monogia. No one hits me. I'm the top runner for the Pirate King. No one crosses me and lives." "What is your name?" "I told you. It's Managia. Yours?" "Ah, my name is secret. But I do need to see the Pirate King. So maybe, as long as you don't pull a knife on me again, you could aid me in getting an audience with him. Anyway, that way, maybe you can have your space back because I can get on my way and on with some work." Manager cocked his head to one side and looked at me in silence for a few seconds. "You one of them new mercenaries we've been waiting for?" I stood up and now found he was only about up to my shoulders. It did allow him to see I was armed, and that I hoped would stop him from any further questions and open the door. If they wanted mercenaries, then maybe this was the way in. I looked down at him. Maybe. So, are you going to keep your boss waiting, or take me to see him? Now he laughed, turned his back on me. A bad move, really, but I let it go. And once he had retrieved his knife, he called me to follow him, and we entered the building and started down the stairs from the roof. As soon as we entered, something told me, call it a gut feeling if you like, that I had better cover my face. I reached inside my inner pocket, pulled out a thin scarf, flipped it into a triangle before tying it around my face, so now, with the hood up, only my eyes showed. When Manager turned back to see if I was following, he laughed and nodded. The corridors we walked down were dimly lit, and we seemed to go through endless twists and turns. And then we came to the end of a long corridor. The massive double doors were closed. Using the handle on his knife, he tapped on the door 3 times, then a count of 2, then 3 more taps with another break, then 7 in rapid succession. A code, one would presume, as a small window about halfway down that opened, and he bent down and whispered something before the lock could be heard and the door swung partially open. I don't know what I had expected, but what we walked into was more like an ancient interior courtyard with people hanging out over the balconies which surrounded it on all sides. Ahead and over the empty space there was what could only be described as a raised dais, on which sat around a dozen people on long couches, with a very large low table running the full length of the area. Drinks and glasses littered its top, as did a few boxes of assorted sweets and God alone knows what else. A striking man, with shoulder-length hair, black as a raven's feathers, sat in a large armchair, presiding, it would seem, over everything. When I say sat, he was, yes, but with one leg lazily draped over one of the arms and his back propped into the opposite corner. A woman stood behind him with a large bunch of fruit in her hands, which she was feeding him amongst much laughter and merriment. I was automatically reading the room, feeling the energy, and my military senses were highly tuned to feel for anything that was out of place. Yes, there was a signature that was not in keeping with the rest. Automatically I started to scan all the faces. To any here, I was simply looking around, as if intimidated or trying to get my bearings, when, in fact, I was homing in on that one energy which was out of place. It was a Time Lord, a watcher. He was on the first balcony to my left, standing in the background, and our eyes met. He touched his hat and smiled, then disappeared and was gone. No words, just the recognition that we had both energetically picked each other up. This was a little disconcerting, as I was totally in the dark, and maybe this was part of the reason I had been told to use my name Aisha while here. I wished little one was here, as I couldn't be 100% sure if he was a maverick or was actually here on official business as a watcher for some specific reason. I would, from now on, have to watch my back, just in case. Welcome to Galactic Time Lords, Part 2. I watch now a log from the pirate craft, which Mina, the Pirate King's woman, believed I should, to understand better what had happened. I was told it was after this particular time that many things started to change on the planet. Many had disappeared, and mining had been stepped up, so there was always shifts working. My gut told me that someone had been manipulating things to allow the old empire to get its total grip here. We were in the Milky Way, for God's sake. This was too close to home. The reality to me was far more dangerous than to these I was with, yet they had called for help. I watched. Jacko was sitting in the main seat of what looked like a very old trading ship. It had definitely seen better days, but then, I supposed, being a pirate, he would simply take another ship when he wanted. Others, I did not know, were lying around. No one seemed really to be doing anything. Now I turned and looked out of the large front viewing window. They were slowly coming in towards what looked like a space breaker's yard or scrapyard. They were coming out from behind a planet, from the dark side, and what I was seeing was possibly just a fraction of the massive gold mine a ship like this, with a grabbing arm, would collect. I saw more now, and I realised that what I was looking at was the remains of rockets, ships, fuel tanks, as well as satellites and other space junk. Then, the Earth. The blue planet was below, and beyond what I was looking at. So the craft had come in from the dark side of the moon. An alarm went off, and now everyone took their place, and it looked as if they were actually here to collect things, probably direct for orders. An old audio-visual screen spluttered and rolled into operation. "Jacko? Jacko, you miserable young scoundrel, can you hear me?" Jacko grinned before pressing a button on the console and answering. "Yes, Prof, I hear you. And yes, before you ask, we have arrived where you told us to go. So, now what?" The rolling screen stabilised and I felt a chill run through my flesh. The speaker was humanoid, and that couldn't be denied, but he wore a grey, coarse-fibred coat with a hood up. However, while in shadow, I could see that part of his face was hidden behind a sculpted metal mask. I had a feeling, a knowing, that we actually knew each other from somewhere. "Now, Jacko, you claim salvage rights, dear boy. Pick up as much as you can carry and then turn your craft around. I will then give you the new coordinates for where you have to drop them and pick up your fee. Do this correctly, and pirate or not, there will be much compensation for your time and effort should you wish to run this trip on a perpetual basis, for a while at least." Jacko cocked his head to one side and grinned. Maybe he had landed something very lucrative, and maybe he could really use this to his own advantage as well. "You are saying just grab anything? There is no specific piece of wreckage your clients are interested in?" "That's correct. Everything in that sector is of use to them, so in theory, getting it in any order is better than not getting it. Now, dear boy, have you any other questions before I break contact, or before this thing dies?" "Only one, Prof. Do I need to cover my back against detection? Federation police, or anyone else?" There was a wicked laugh from the professor before he answered. "No, in reality there should be no one in that sector. It has been a quarantine zone for a long time. However, there have been a few excursions into the ancient moon bases on the dark side of that moon. So simply use your scanner, if you have one. However, I doubt they would show themselves for fear of causing an energy signal to be monitored. As to the planet and its inhabitants, I am told by my clients that they will not be a problem, as the method they use to travel is so slow and ancient in design, you could probably do half a dozen trips before they could even send someone out to see if you even existed." The connection sputtered and broke. Jacko looked around him. The crew consisted of only half a dozen, including himself and Mina. He was travelling light, so they could pick up as much as possible and get to the rendezvous. This was, after all, not a usual trip where they would hijack another vessel or anything like that. Today, only those needed to work the grabbers, to maybe do a spacewalk and a mechanic, plus him and Mina, who he was training to be the co-pilot. Oh, and the ship herself. That was it. Beniska, do you pick anything up on the radar? There was a short pause before a very sultry female voice came back to him. I have scanned around, and no, there is nothing anywhere around. Not off-planet, anyway. The professor was right about the satellite planet we came in past. There is a deep warren of bases below the surface, but at the moment nothing is moving. Not that it is giving off a heat signature to indicate life, anyway. Jacko had grinned. The others were now at their stations and laughing and joking about having found the last forgotten pirate's cave of Stash, which, as long as Jacko agreed, they had every intention of keeping the best and the most lucrative prizes for themselves. Anyway, pickings had been very thin recently, so anything extra was better than nothing at all. So it was that they had started to collect and deliver regular loads of detritus and debris to the coordinates that the professor gave them. Payment was delivered by a robot as soon as the delivery was made in the hangar. That itself was only visible once they had confirmed who they were with a given code, which changed each time. This always amused Jacko, because first they had to connect with the professor, who then opened a wormhole near where they were, the exit of which delivered them into orbit around a small red-coloured planet where the hidden hangar was located. They never saw anyone, nor was the previous load still where they had delivered it. Always the hangar was empty when they arrived. Admittedly, even using the provided wormhole, they were limited on the warp drive speed of the cargo collection, and delivery took quite some time. But Jacko believed there was more to this than met the eye. He had been ordered, not advised, ordered, that should he want to leave the area and go home, he would need to confirm that his intention of doing another run and a portal would then be specially opened, giving him direct access to the zone. To save time, he was told. He knew it was not the real reason. Call it a gut feeling. He believed that the professor was using his knowledge as a somewhat fallen renegade Time Lord to also change dimensions and maybe even time itself. He smiled. Two thieves together. Well, they were both earning, weren't they? Welcome to Part 3 of the Galactic Time Lords. Jacko, who is head of the mining enclave on a small planet way out in the Milky Way, yet not that far from Earth, has been coerced by what would appear to be a renegade Time Lord, who they call the Professor, the Prof. So, shall we continue? Mina broke off. The alarm was sounding, and although it was quiet, it was still very audible, and she looked at the screen. Come, Jacko wants to see you in our private quarters. She started walking away from where we had been, and opened a portal further back, and walked through with me following. It closed behind me, and I was standing in a pleasant area, which, if you looked, was an absolute replica of our human idea of Aladdin's cave, or the cave of a pirate king, filled with all his ill-gotten treasures. I had to smile to myself, and over in one corner there was also a cockerel and a group of hens, some birds in a cage. He was already there when we entered, sat at an ornate but well-used table, well in keeping with his somewhat stylized wardrobe, with the baggy sleeves tight to the wrist, his leather jerkin, and what looked like old-fashioned combat trousers and boots from the Federation. Nothing in here was high-tech, or not that I could see. He looked up at me as Mina whispered something into his ear. Then he opened his mouth to speak. At almost the same time, my skin crawled. Call it an inbuilt antenna for listening devices. I raised the palm of my hand to silence him, then started concentrating before walking over to a group of old but more than antique electronic panels which lay in a pile, not connected to anything. He was now alongside me and I pointed it out to him. I saw him redden, out of anger or something else, I was not sure. He did no more than yell at Mina that she was supposed to take out that trash to the edge of the ravine. Why hadn't she done it? Then he winked. She smiled and feigned fear and picked up the pile, which she then carried out the way presumably Jacko had come in, as that was the airlock door to this space. I heard his thought. No, there are no more in here. And before you ask, yes, I am in some ways like Mina, which occasionally allows me the edge in combat and other things. He nodded and asked me to sit. He sat opposite me and rested his arms on the table, clasping his hands together and looking at them as if thinking before he spoke. I understand Mina started to show you how this all began, or shall we say, how I believe it began, at least with what happened here not long after. I nodded. Then I presume she has also told you that the things that you and she can do are outlawed here, so no one must be aware. Again, I nodded. I was waiting for him to tell me what had happened and why this was all connected. But him saying the Prof was a fallen Time Lord had already given me some horrible thoughts. My brain was following. He had, I feared, spliced into their timeline, and for greed, possibly for power, he had helped to destabilize the life here and bring in the AI, and maybe even the Dark Lords, if that connection was also in place. I had a horrible feeling. Now, this mission was becoming multi-layered and dangerous, and I didn't have Little One or any of the others to help me. A voice in my heart whispered, "Remember, you don't always have what you need in battles. A good soldier improvises. Remember your training. Remember all sides of it." I looked at Jacko. I had obviously been partly oblivious, as he was looking at me curiously. "What did you pick up this time?" I smiled. "Nothing urgent. But now I need to know when this change happened, how fast, and how bad it has got. Remember, I haven't even seen a sunrise here yet." He laughed. "Sun? Lady, you are on the wrong piece of rock. Here, real sunshine is a thing forgotten and not known by most. Mining was stepped up and tripled the output, which has led to so much dust in the air that the sun as it is very weak now, and like the planet we delivered the old parts to." He stopped dead with his mouth partly open. His mind and mine had tripped over the same thought at the same time. No, let's leave that thought in the background for now. When did you start picking up the scrap and delivering it to the Prof and his clients? Well, let me think. Manager was just starting to walk, and that would mean he and Mina were still very new. Did she explain how she came, or they came, to be here? I shook my head. It isn't necessary. She will. May, when she feels she can. For now it is more important to make sure what has happened here can, if possible, be put right. Now, why did you call in a mercenary, and what exactly are you hoping can be done? I asked Mina to go with Manager to get Adrian, the head of the Buccaneers. He is also a good friend, and together with us, wants this problem sorted. It's bad for business, for both of us. He tapped his fingers on the table. He was nervous, worried. He should be here soon, and then we can talk. He will also be the one that will take you to the mining community. They may now, come to think about it, also be able to say if the thought we both had just now is also true. I hope we're wrong, because if not, I fear there is nothing you or anyone can do. I looked at him. Actually, you're wrong. No ordinary mercenary could. But if that is the problem, then I am the only one who has a chance. It won't be easy, but it is possible. However, I may have to break more than a few rules. But then, rules, universal laws, were broken to cause this. So I can only hope me breaking a few will be allowed. Hello and welcome to Galactic Time Lords number 4. Mina and Adrian, along with Managia, walked in through the airlock. Adrian stopped dead and stared. His face, for a split second, went ashen. His bottom jaw dropped, and although he looked as if he would speak, nothing came out. Then the colour came back, and one word escaped him. "You!" Everyone looked at him, and then at me. "You know her?" Now he shook his head and laughed, somewhat embarrassed. "No, only in my dreams, Jacko, only in my dreams. Maybe I'd better stop running into space I am not supposed to be in, and carrying and sampling nectar that is not mine." He was introduced now, and unlike Jacko, who had never offered his hand, except when I helped him up after he got flattened by me, now this blonde-haired, tall, baby-faced man with piercing light blue eyes walked forward and automatically gripped my arm, in the same greeting as had Tandor when we first met. I did not hold back, but took his cue and gripped his forearm as he did mine. I felt a miniature electric shock run up my arm, and my gift from Athena stirred. "Well, and I hope you have the skill to help us." He was still gripping my arm when he turned to Jacko, who was silently watching. "What have you told her? You wouldn't have made me leave the safety of my ship if you didn't think she could help." We all sat, and Managia was sent to do an errand, which I could feel he was not happy about. He wanted to be involved. The conversation now was mostly centred on the real reason they had put out the call for aid. The mining had increased, but it was what had happened within the governing council, and thus how everything worked, that had changed so much that basically they felt like a prison colony. The motto now was simple: work till you drop, and then, well, disappear. Most of the council were never seen by the general populace anymore, unless there was a meeting called because of riots or like. However, there were rumours from those who worked in the homes of the council members that many had changed in ways that were totally out of character. It was as if they had been taken over, or were under some mind power, or, if they had, been replaced by replicants. Whole families had started disappearing, and new council members arrived. These were cyborg, yes, mixed humanoid and machine. They had no feeling, no compassion, nor any idea as to how far a worker could be physically pushed before he became useless. People from the city, the buccaneers, the pirate sectors, as well, were rounded up and disappeared. That was still going on. Ships that came to trade many times left with part of their crew missing, or their ships were press-ganged into carrying undisclosed cargo. The miner community had been the worst affected. They had at first said no, and accused the council of robbing them blind, and much more. However, they also were silenced when their leaders were imprisoned, and the women and children shipped off to another planet within the local system. They were promised they would see them if they met quota every quarter, but that never happened for all. Only small groups were taken, and in some cases they themselves never returned. The whisper started that they were being used to mine on another sector of the planet. The life for Jacko and his sector, as well as for the buccaneers, had also changed. Adrian was one of 3 brothers. The other 2 had been taken, and he had not seen them for what seemed like a lifetime. Jacko reminded him that Managia had been cutting his first full set of teeth, if he didn't remember his brother Rufo getting bitten, and actually the kid had drawn blood. I caught Mina looking at me sideways. Were these the missing brothers? Only one way to find out. Adrian, what do you know of the talk of the sons of the leaders of the mining community who were stolen? A silence fell over the entire room. They are called honoured guests and are kept in the main buildings where the council chambers are. Only one is seen occasionally, and he is never allowed to speak. The other two, we know, are still alive, but kept locked in rooms. Only a tutor, a cyborg, is allowed entry. Did Mina tell you about them? He shot a look in her direction. No. It was I who asked her. Look, how safe is this area to talk, and how open are you three to knowing a few truths? I feel it is only fair to be open. Well, at least to let you know what you may need to. I had their attention now, their full attention. They wanted to know. After all, they still believed they were to pay me. Again, that was my negotiation point. I wanted their assistance, not their credits. I withdrew my personal log crystal from my inner pocket. Jacko whistled out loud and reached for it, but the very fast reactions and large hand of his friend Adrian flew out and stopped him. Holding him in a vice-like grip, he said, "No," and then he looked at me. I have seen one of these before, sorry to say, in a dream, but that dream was so real I can remember more and more word for word. What is it? I nodded and looked at the other two. I am not a Time Lord like the Prof, nor am I Federation, although Adrian used a signal greeting that was used a long, long time ago in my reality by members of the Force in this galaxy. This is my personal log. I am showing it because I want to bring up the galaxy as I know it and see what difference you two pilots can point out. It is useless me asking the year or what age, etc. we are in, because the concept of time is different and in many places does not exist at all. So, this will save time, I hope. I centered myself and brought up a large three-dimensional map of the Milky Way galaxy, then showed them where I believed we were. In the end, when I had turned the image over so that it was a mirrored image, they agreed that now I had it right. Well, now at least I had something to work from. Now for the coordinates the Prof sent them to the first time. Where had he opened the wormhole, and what coordinates were the other end? The first was not far out from the planet here, in what I would class as universal space rather than planetary space. However, Jacko drew a blank as to the one nearest to the moon at the other end. I still hadn't told them I knew the area. It was Mina now who spoke, quietly offering that I could probably retrieve it from her mind. Adrian again looked at me in surprise. She reached out her hand and I took it. I didn't want to use the crystal, as I wasn't sure what other pictures her poorly trained mind might let slip. This method would be safer for her, and less embarrassing. She had been trained as a co-pilot, and she had been watching the coordinates on the console. I had them, and let go of her hand. Putting them up on the map, I heard them gasp. No wonder it took us so long, even with the wormholes. At minimum warp speed. I now showed them Mars, the nearest red planet to where they collected the goods, or space debris. I knew they had been there to start with for the first 4 or 5 trips, because I'd pulled all of the coordinates I could from Mina's mind. I pulled the planet right up, large, so that they could walk around and see it from all angles, and see if they recognised any shapes or landmarks. Suddenly Jacko got excited. There! I remember that outcrop. Actually, coming in low, it is like a mountain range, but shaped differently from anything else that I have ever seen. I looked to where he was pointing and my blood ran cold. It was the ancient base, which was supposed to have been destroyed. It was the base where the laboratories had been. The space Dralinmer, Belaldwin and myself, with the aid of Mestali, had gone back to when we were trying to see the origins of the Darkling virus, of the Dark Lord and the original reptilian and mantis agents. The place, also, of the genetic splicing, the hybrids. I said nothing, simply drew away from Mars, and then mentally inserted the next coordinating grouping. The galaxy span back into the setting of my reality and then twisted once more into theirs. The red line showed the beginnings and the end of all of the other trips were marked, and now I homed in on where the deliveries had been made. I heard Jacko gasp, and then use some very choice words. It was here, on their chunk of rock, some in their reality, some in mine, but all on the other side of the planet to where we were now. There had to be a base there. I was wondering if there was also a Stargate. I needed to get to the mining community, and fast. Adrian, how quickly can you get me to the miners and to be able to see the leaders? The sooner the better, to be honest. Well, if I can use Jacko's old-fashioned radio to contact my ship. We got a large quantity of transmitters and receiver equipment from Jacko's trips for the Prof. We use them because they can't be traced by anyone in our time. They should be all in a museum, to be honest. But they work. The two men left, and Mina and I spoke for a while. I told her I would take Managia next time. This first trip would only be to make contact, and I also wanted to know it was safe. However, when the men came back, they did so in a rush, and both me and Mina were instructed to grab what we could and run. They would meet us at the ship, and they told her where. Managia was with them and left with them. He had the old radio equipment in the bag on his back. Hello and welcome to part 5 of the Galactic Time Lords. These shorts about some of the Time Lords who may well play a part in our own timelines here, not just elsewhere, are here as a tantalising view of some of those that Aisha comes across as she faces the challenges that have been put down for her on what some might call a hero's journey. Have you heard or seen things change and wonder if you are going mad because you remember things in a different way? Yes, many of us have. So let's find out what the Professor is really up to, whether he is playing not only with time, but the dimensions. The moment that we were on board, the rear closed and we sat in the nearest jump seats. Then we were pushed back in our chairs momentarily as Adrian and Jacko got us out of the zone fast, and with a very steep turn as we climbed, I presumed they were taking us out over the deep chasm that I had seen earlier. Now we seemed to aim almost vertically downwards, and I watched Mina as she started to smile and then relax as we levelled out. Adrian came back, and seeing that we were both okay and everything was as it should be, he asked Mina if she would like to join Jacko and the others up in front. They, he said, could introduce her to a different craft, so she could learn while we were on this rather sudden mission. She eagerly accepted, and he then asked if he could join me for a few minutes to chat. Thanks for getting Mina out of there so quickly and with so much stuff. How did you manage to shift so much? Or shouldn't I ask? He smiled and looked down a little self-consciously. I told you I had seen you, the crystal, in a dream. Well, so much is happening right now that I'm beginning to wonder what is true and what isn't. You mentioned the grip I used when greeting you. I've never used that before, but it seemed right. I did, however, stop myself from using the words in greeting that I wanted to. He now looked me straight in the eyes. Commander Aisha, Special Ops Unit Alpha. I stared at him, but didn't deny nor admit anything. For the love of Cyanthus, put a guy out of his misery. Was I dreaming? Was it real? Or am I going mad? I held his gaze and told him it was real, then asked him, as long as it wasn't X-rated, if he could tell me something from his vision. First, he asked if I was operating undercover, or if I was actually Renegade and set up as a mercenary. I told him it was neither, that I was in fact being sent on missions at the moment as part of a set of challenges. If I could complete them all, I would return to my normal duties. If not, well, I smiled and shrugged. That latter is not an option. Now, Adrian, what did you see? It could be important. Then you can tell me about the miners and their leader, or leaders. He looked uncomfortable for a few microns. Okay, and no, it isn't what I might have liked it to be. It is actually very curious. I seemed to be watching a couple of beings looking at those crystals, but there was a bank of them and holographic pictures were projected, and basically it was telling your military history. Then I saw you fighting things, creatures, but you also were on a mystical beast. I saw others with you, and their skills were incredible. The next flash of pictures was you, and a few others standing in space, with no suits, no protection that I could see, yet you were all fighting invading forces, from what I could hear. Then the whole went blank, as I heard a scream, or more like a roar of anger. I woke up, but your face, your rank, and the pictures I told you about have haunted me since. Then earlier today, you became real. Our eyes met. I tried not to notice the electricity in the air. He had no idea what power he had. I stopped my train of thought and came very much back to the present. There was work to do. Thank you, Adrian. Yes, you were used as a messenger. Thank you again for trusting me and for passing on your dream. Now it is even more important to work fast. I have not got the others here. I am alone. But as any soldier knows, we can find allies in strange places. And working to a common goal, we can be just as successful. Tell me about your home planet and the miners. Short, to the point, and if that is difficult, if you give me permission to touch your hand, I can retrieve what I need. He stammered, and I swear he blushed. No, it's okay. I can give you everything that you need in a nutshell. I was also in the forces at some point in my checkered past. Now he laughed and mockingly saluted me. He and his elder brothers, their father before them, had worked closely with the miners for trade, but also the mining communities had, over generations, adapted their world, their way of living as the light got dimmer, because the open mine casting was going deeper and deeper into the planet. Great canyons had been excavated, and the ore and the minerals taken away by both the ore carriers, like Adrian's family, but also by the council's special containers. Work was done day and night in long shifts. As he stopped, I waited a second and then spoke. Have you managed to get a meeting for us when we arrive? And how much longer will it be? He nodded. Yes, D'Artemio will meet with you when we land. I will come with you. The others will remain on the craft, and it will be parked not too far away, but cloaked. I don't want to draw any attention. to this or to anyone. He got up to leave. We will be there very shortly. I haven't given them a name for you. What do you wish to use? Now you have seen my dream? It is possibly better that the name Aisha is not used here. Not yet, anyway. How about just Commander? I nodded, and as he turned to leave, I asked him about the name. Protector or what? He had used before. The name, Cyanthus. He smiled. She looks after the downtrodden, the buccaneers, and those who help those who can't help themselves. It is also the name of my cargo carrier, and a small cruiser me and Jacko managed to liberate from some, shall we say, rather nasty rich individuals. He smiled and then walked away. I watched him as he walked back to the front and the rest of the crew. Now alone, I could tap into the residue of his energy and home in on the exact pictures he had described. I had respected his right to not allow me to get these direct, but I did need to see exactly who, and certainly what crystal memories they were tapped into. I touched the space where Adrian had been sat, and as I had my crystal in my hand, I wanted to record all of this as it ran, and then I could look at it later, just in case I missed a little detail. I closed my eyes and started spinning through quantum space and time. Then I stopped with a jolt. The area was dark, and I was in the shadow behind the beings, watching the holographic pictures, and the bank of crystals was visible. Even like this, the dark residue was almost suffocating. I looked around me in all directions before coming back to the scene in front of me. While it was dark, later something important may appear that right now I wasn't registering. A language was being used by those watching that I didn't know, so I simply asked for all to be made clear to me. I wasn't sure if it would work, but it did, and I thanked Athena, and then, as an afterthought, also thanked Cyanthus. What he had seen was, it would appear, the entirety of the record they had. The key instance being replayed again and again was the final part, where I and a group had taken on the invading forces. Yes, this had been recorded by someone in the adversary fleet. That particular battle had been very brutal and quick, and most of the crafts and pilots coming through the breach were AI. This was a mishmash of things that had been clipped onto one of those logs from an AI pilot. Now I saw the second being in the room. As he turned slightly, as if feeling me, I recognized the metal mask over part of the face. It was the Professor, the Renegade Time Lord. I hope you've enjoyed this, and as this is part of the Time Lords that Aisha throughout the series will come across, just a few of them. You have now seen some that are slightly more dark, and you have seen those that walk amongst us on Earth. Maybe you'll come back. Maybe you'll enjoy some of the other characters. If you really are interested, you can find the Professor in Cosmic Porn, the latest book to come out. And so, until next time, I wish you goodbye.